Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and a warm welcome to today's webinar, which is brought to you by Shared Services Link in association with Blackline. Today, we're looking at the Cash App tool equaling productivity game changers. I'm really pleased to be interviewing today Nelson Lopes, who is the VP of Finance at the Chef's Warehouse. And we're just going to jump straight in. Let's find out a little bit, please, Nelson, about Chef's Warehouse and also a bit about you.
Sure. So we were initially founded back in 1985. The founders took us public around 2011. We're about 2.6 billion in annual sales today, and we're a food distributor. So we market product to, for the most part, your independent restaurants, but we also do business with hotels and cruise lines and other large food establishments throughout the United States, Canada, and recently we've also acquired an entity out in the Middle East. So we're also servicing into Dubai, Oman, and Qatar, which is pretty exciting for us. We offer about over 50,000 SKUs to our customers across 44 distribution centers. We have north of 40,000 unique customer locations. From an ERP perspective, we are multi-ERP. Again, a lot of that is because we are highly acquisitive. We've acquired about 8 companies in the last 12 months or so. So very active in the M&A space. But our predominant ERPs are JD Edwards, which runs what we call our specialty business, which is more kind of box in, box out. And then we have the Canopy environment, which supports our protein operation, which is the area of the business that I oversee in my current role. And that has an element of production. We'll take cuts of meat and cut it to order to a chef's spec. I've been with the company now about a little over 6 years, probably close to 7 now. I initially came in as a director of financial reporting, moved on to take on treasury as well. And over the last year or so, I've been the VP of finance over that protein organization.
Great. Let's focus on more on the kind of the order to cash now and zero in on that and the cash application part in particular. When you kind of look at life a few years ago, just before you automated the cash app process, could you just kind of talk to us a little bit about what life looked like back then for you and what were you actually after in terms of a solution?
So it started in my treasury role, and I always had a knack of finding ways to work better, smarter, faster, always looking for ways to improve and create efficiencies. So we had 2 challenges 2 or 3 years ago. One, in the JDE environment, we did have an in-house auto cash application system that had been developed to support those businesses, although it wasn't learning real time. It took a lot of effort and data mining to create kind of relationships between the ultimate payer and our customers. So although we had efficiency there, again, it wasn't real time. And it was really only structured to support customers that pay us via check. We would pay our banking partner lockbox keying services. We would leverage those data sets in addition to data sets that we would maintain in-house to facilitate auto matching. As customers began to transition more and more to ACH, we had zero automation on the ACH side. So I think going back to when this started, maybe 5% of our customer base was paying via ACH. That's shifted over the years. They're probably more around that 15% mark today. If we're not able to leverage that growing payment channel, obviously we don't get the scalability that we would have wanted. On the Canopy side, that was 100% manual. So very much a grinding job, people logging in the morning, going through the lockbox, reviewing the checks, reviewing the remittances, and then closing out the applicable invoices in the ERP system, which is obviously time consuming, labor intensive, and it doesn't necessarily scale with the pace of our growth.
So it sounds to me that you were off to help you with all of this and to help you with the prospect that more companies were going to be paying you through ACH, that you were after an automation of Cash App. What were some of your requirements and what would you say was the kind of the big vision for you?
What led us down this path was I started looking at how much we were paying the banks, right? And I realized that a good portion of that was in the lockbox service. I got an understanding of why we need that information in order to kind of facilitate the in-house program that we had in place. And I started to think of, well, is there a better solution out there that can be ERP agnostic that I could leverage and utilize to support the JDE ERP system as well as the Canopy ERP system, and not necessarily have to shell out those dollars to the banks if there was some alternate way to create those relationships and facilitate automation. We came across a few vendors that had a solution. When we came across Blackline Cash, one of the neat things there was, you go through a demo and everything on a demo environment looks great. But I would say that the way our customers pay us is a little bit unique because we do have a large presence in what I call like the street business, which could be your restaurateur that maybe owns one restaurant, maybe 2 or 3 restaurants, not some sophisticated enterprise with a large back office. Sometimes the quality of the remit information that you get isn't what you would like in a typical B2B environment. So we wanted to understand how Blackline Cash could cope with that. So the fact that, they were able to come in, take some of our data, put it up on a test environment at no cost to us and kind of prove their concept that their algorithms will facilitate auto match even with our customer base was very helpful. Obviously, no decision was made in a silo. We took in the input from obviously our cash app team, credit collections, obviously because there's downstream impacts to them. We took in the input of our IT team and some folks in the broader accounting and finance role to get kind of their insights. And the vast majority of folks preferred the Blackline Cash process. The graphic user interface was easier to understand. And one of the things I liked was the pricing model. It was super transparent. So you're on a pricing tier based on the volume of payments that the system processes, which again, I can wrap my head around it to make sure that we're getting what we're paying for. And what we saw with some of the alternate platforms out there is that they would make it based on remittance line information, which is a little bit difficult to wrap at least my head around because one payment might have 60 remittances lines, it might have 1. So how do you get a sense of where you fit in that pricing tier? And how do you forecast what your expenses are going to be on that platform when you're in an M&A environment? I can estimate, okay, given this acquisition, we're probably going to have X amount of payments a month and extrapolate what that means for us. I can't do that on remittance lines.
Okay, great. And then you were talking, Nelson, as well about how getting buy-in from different parts of the business. You said earlier that you didn't make this decision in an isolated fashion. Can you tell us a little bit more about bringing in the other key stakeholders?
Sure. I mean, obviously, anything like this is kind of cross-departmental in my view. There's no way, accounting can run with this project start to finish without the support of other departments. So that's going to take time commitment. It's going to take their resources to help execute. So definitely wanted to make sure that there was no blind spots that we weren't considering prior to going down this path of implementing the Blackline Cash product. From the IT perspective, will this work with the existing ERP that we have? Taking into account, we don't have an off-the-shelf ERP, although JD Edwards is a widely used platform and so is Canopy. We do have a lot of custom programming that we've implemented over the years, so we wanted to make sure that when we switch over to the Blackline Cash tool, that there are no downstream impacts from an ERP perspective as well, and that we're not breaking something in the process of trying to make another part of our business a little bit more efficient. Obviously, you want the input of the users because it impacts them on the day-to-day basis. From an accounting finance perspective, it's also kind of how do you rationalize the spend, right? What's the ROI of the product? And is it worth proceeding with and prioritizing compared to the other opportunities that we have to balance as a company?
Yeah. So we're going to focus the next few moments on the implementation. I remember when we were talking about this leading up to this webinar today, Nelson, you were talking about signing up to the Blackline solution and going into the project just before the pandemic. So tell us a little bit about the implementation, if you would.
So, obviously one of the things was our implementation specialist that has guided us through the JDE implementation is currently working with us on the Canopy implementation, actually was, I believe, a customer of Blackline Cash in a past life. So the fact that she was in our shoes really helped us in terms of making sure that we're thoughtful in thinking of all the different payment scenarios and considerations that we should be taking into account as part of the implementation process and making sure that it's as well designed and well thought out as possible. We kind of started the initial framework, I want to say late 2019, early 2020. Obviously the pandemic hit, which was super significant to our business, servicing the restaurant community. So I think that added some legs because once that hit, priorities shifted at the company. Nobody was dedicating any time to projects such as these. But, as we kind of stabilized and came out of it, we went back into it and we're able to go from that initial start kind of late 2019 to being live in JD Edwards around October, November of 2020. So it took us about 10, 12 months to complete the project. There were were definitely course corrections that we had to make along the process, especially when we went into our kind of UAT phase and making sure that, as we tested the different payment scenarios, what our ERP could support versus what it couldn't. And when it couldn't, and there wasn't a black line solution for it, finding alternatives internally to fill in the gaps.
Looking at the project team, I think it might be useful for the viewers to understand the individual that led the project here. Tell us a little bit about their profiles.
From a UAT, from an implementation standpoint, obviously it was the support of our IT team, making sure that all the spec inputs and outputs from Blackline Cash were, one, scoped out correctly so that the ERP could ingest it, and that the ERP would export the data set in such a way that it can be adjusted by Blackline and vice versa. Obviously we had IT support. The UAT phase, the design of it, other than kind of the IT specific stuff, was mostly done by leaders in our accounting and cash app teams. Obviously they have a good sense of what our customer payment behavior is like, scoping out all the different payment scenarios that we have and actually testing them through the platform.
Knowing what you know now, Nelson, looking back on this program, what would you say were some of the key lessons learned?
I think one thing that we found that's super critical is having somebody in that Cash App team that can really learn and understand how the Blackline Cash system works, that has a system-based understanding of how the algorithm works, all the steps in the process, how to handle kind of unforeseen circumstances, and really kind of own Blackline Cash as if it was actually a virtual team member, because that's how I view it. It is a virtual team member that is able to automatically apply a good chunk of your payment volume in the morning, but it's not a plug and play and forget. I think it's something that needs to be constantly monitored and looked at for ways to iteratively improve it over time. So to have that knowledge sit in Cash App is, I think, imperative versus having it sit with somebody in IT or somebody else.
Let's now talk about some of the results, and these are obviously going to be concerning productivity, a bit of headcount reduction. I understand that you've moved your team onto more strategic kind of value-adding activities, and also to follow that, the cultural benefits as well that this has brought to the team. So what would you say were some of the key benefits?
I guess from a finance perspective, is the ROI. So the system, it kind of pays for itself. If I look at the lockbox savings that we've generated since going live, Blackline pays for itself within a year. So to get that level of ROI from a hard cost perspective is, I think, pretty rare. Secondly, on productivity, it's been tremendous. If you look at how that platform is performing on the JDE environment, more or less on par with the solution we had in the past, that in-house solution, the difference is on the ACH side. So on the ACH side, again, 100% was done manually in the past. Now about a third of ACH payments are being applied automatically by Blackline Cash, which again now frees up capacity amongst the Cash App team to be able to ingest new acquisitions as we integrate them into the JD Edwards environment without having to hire additional heads, because everybody's productivity has been raised. On the Canopy side, although we're not 100% through what I would call our implementation, I would say that we're kind of 80% of the way there. There's certain functionality that we're still working on getting the code in place in Canopy. But for what is there, we went from 100% manual to 66% automated. And that acceleration from 0 to 66% happened quite rapidly. I was actually surprised by that. It took us about 6 weeks to go from 0 to 66%. Now, on the protein side, just for context, a lot of our terms are 7 to 14 days. So you do have, multiple payment cycles within a month that helps accelerate that growth rate.
And let's talk a little bit more about the impact on the workforce. I know you've been talking about a happier team, basically.
On the JDE team, that team is very kind of specialized. They just work solely on Cash App. So the benefits there, again, is just the scalability, right? We can add in more business units across the same team and still hit the targets we have for Cash App. On the Canopy side, a little bit more pronounced because those folks are a little bit less of kind of dedicated Cash App folks. But that being said, so in the past, somebody might have taken like a full day to do the lockbox during one of our busier lockbox days. Now they're all done by noon. So it frees up 4 hours at least a day for them to work now on more value-add tasks, whether that's customer support, whether that's updating customer master information, supporting our collection team, working through, any unapplied cash that we might have, or some other ad hoc tasks that a controller can send that person's way. I think that's brought not only more value-added work being done by that group of folks, but one of the challenges that we used to have on the Canopy side is that each opco was kind of thinly staffed. If your main cash app person was out, now somebody has to backfill that person within that opco. And obviously that sets everything back. Now we're able to spread that work across the opcos because now, again, we're working in an ERP agnostic environment. If somebody's overly burdened at their opco with a particular lockbox day, we can spread the work across more folks. If somebody's out, I can easily transition that lockbox responsibility to somebody else and have them complete while the other person's out without having to bring in accounting staff to support the cash app cycle. So again, it reduces a lot of that kind of grunt work, allows people to work on more value add tasks, cuts down the monotony of their day, gives them kind of opportunities to kind of showcase their skill set across a broader range of deliverables. Also kind of helps them be more well-rounded and flesh out their skill set. And, as it can be like a career progression opportunity now because they're involved in more, they have an opportunity to shine more than if they're just doing cash app 100% of the time.
Great. That takes us on to KPIs. You talked a little bit about the auto matching KPI, but please, feel free to flesh that out a bit more and other KPIs that have been improved because of your program.
Yeah, definitely the auto match piece speaks for itself. To get 2/3 of your overall payment platform auto matched is quite impressive. And now that 66% includes ACH. So if you recall back, our ACH match rate is about 30%. So that implies that on the check side, on average, we're doing north of 75%. We have some lockbox locations, our averages in Canada are getting matched at 80%, which again is a very high match rate. The other things that Blackline Cash allows for is just giving us more real-time information. Any day I can log into the platform, pull up a dashboard, and I can see what our match rate is over a date range of my choosing across each of our bank accounts. I can disaggregate that between checks and ACHs and kind of monitor how those lockbox match rates are performing over a period of time. Allows us to figure out, hey, why does this lockbox in particular have a lower match rate than this other one? Is there a certain customer that is giving us not enough remittance information? And trying to kind of understand based on the information that now we are able to grab real time allows us to kind of course correct and again get into that mode of iterative improvement. Where in the past, even on the JD where we did have auto match, getting that level of kind of real time insight was difficult. You would need IT to be involved, downloading large data sets, somebody who had to be manipulating that in Excel so that you can actually derive patterns from that to help drive decisions. Now that all you got to do is log on, click a button, and you see that immediately. It's just that kind of real-time insight into the data that's flowing through that platform. And then it also measures your staff's performance. So I can jump in there and see, hey, which Cash App user is applying the most payments in the platform. Of the payments that they're responsible for, how many of them are being done manually, semi-automatic, fully automatic? How much time does it take for us to process a lockbox to completion? Hey, this lockbox we start at 8 a.m. in the morning and it's done by noon. This other lockbox is done by 10 a.m. So it gives us a lot of that real-time information where in the past it would be cost prohibitive to track.
Great. Let's move on and talk about where next for you in this regard. Nelson, what does that all look like?
So from a Cash App perspective, I think it's twofold. Bringing the Canopy environment to completion. We're still waiting on some code, again, kind of dependent on third-party developers on the Canopy side to allow for some increased functionality between Blackline Cash and that Canopy ERP, make further gains and cut more and more of the manual aspect of the Cash App job. As we integrate new acquisitions into those core ERP systems, obviously having those payment volumes roll through Blackline Cash. And now, again, any ERP outside of Canopy and JD, we're doing it 100% manual. So as they come on to one of our core ERP systems now, it's another area where we gain scalability and efficiency on the Cash App front. We are also working on implementing some modules that Blackline offers that kind of sit on top of Blackline Cash. Kind of Blackline Cash acts as kind of a foundation to more value add functionality of the overall platform. So right now we're looking into AR management, which again brings a lot of the same efficiencies and automations to the actual collection cycle. So that's the project that I'm kind of more excited about this year now that we have Blackline Cash up and running.